Hi, everybody. Once again, I'm going to change this because today is Inside Scoop with Sue. So welcome to Inside Scoop with Sue. And we're glad to have all of you here, but really, I feel so honored to be having this conversation today with David Ambrose, who is the author of A Place Called Home. And you are described as a national poverty and child welfare expert and advocate. And also, big one, recognized by President Obama as an American champion of change. And the only way to get into this story is to really hear your story. So can you just start telling people who've never heard of you before this moment, how did you grow up?
Sure. Which I imagine is the vast majority of people.
Hopefully not for long, because your book
there you
is
go.
out.
Yes.
Oh, wait, let's just say, hold up your book for everybody, A Place Called Home. And we have some copies to give away. So make sure you email me at editor@yourteenmag.com to be entered into the raffle. And Jessica will put that into the comments so everybody could see that.
So who the heck am I and why am I bothering everyone on this great and glorious day? David Ambrose. And my story really begins 40 plus years ago. I grew up in New York City with my mom and two siblings, a brother and a sister, each of us relatively the same age. I was the youngest. And we were homeless. We were homeless for about 11 years. We wandered the streets. My mom had a debilitating mental illness, as is common with folks that you might run across that are homeless or experiencing homelessness. And for us, as three kids with their mom, we wandered the streets of New York City and other areas nearby looking for the core necessities. My mom's mental illness at times meant she was profoundly violent and almost always neglectful or unable to care for us. So we really fended for ourselves. We lived in the nooks and crannies of cities, in subway stations, in train stations, in parks, sometimes in basements of churches. And we struggled to survive, and quite often almost didn't. When I was about 12, my siblings and I realized at that point we were very much in danger of dying at the hands of my mom. And we had just recently come out of a shelter into an apartment, and it really descended into a level of violence which was new, which is hard to imagine, but it was deeper and more frightening. So my siblings and I had the decision, and we actively placed ourselves in foster care, and we thought we were saved. We thought this is the moment when we go into a half-hour scripted comedy and are loved. And we were not. We were separated. I was separated, and we lived together for a short while in one home. But for the most part, we were separated and struggled to stay in touch. Foster care for me was very violent and very abusive, except for one home, which was lovely, which we can talk about. And I was in group homes and in detention facilities and all sorts of places you shouldn't put a child. And part of that was in part because I am gay. And at the time, homosexuality was considered a problem and a danger. So I was not always allowed to live in certain homes with other, quote, normal children. So those facilities were particularly violent for me. And I emancipated from foster care at 17 and went on to commit something I would call light fraud on a grant. Got an exchange program, studied overseas in Spain, and then went on to Vassar College, where I struggled in terms of just paying for things and surviving when they closed the dorm, for instance, and then on to UCLA School of Law and to where I am today. But that period of time, the reason I'm writing my story and sharing it is I'm so struck by the reality that there's the same number of kids that are homeless. There's the same overrepresentation of kids in foster care that was around when I was a kid many, many, many years ago. And that just can't be. We can't keep being okay with untreated mental health, with families living in abject poverty. So I'm hoping my story inspires people to do something, to move from pity and empathy to action. And I think we can all do something.
Okay, I have a million questions, but now what I have to ask you is, you went very fast from this tragedy to, and then I went to Vassar and UCLA. Yeah. So how does one go from really like something that's hard for a person like me to even comprehend to like that pathway to where you are today?
Well, I'll share my story. It it was a core belief reinforced by my mom from birth, imperfectly, to say it mildly, that our only way out of the situation was education. And we barely attended school in my first 12 years. And even in foster care, it was imperfect in terms of attendance because I was moved around so much. I I truly believe we always knew that there would be a way out through education. And the other part about education was we got to eat at school. So for many kids in America, they go to what's called a Title I school, which is a school that has a certain percentage of people getting free lunch, which is the majority of schools. And so my family, we were able to eat at school. We were able to be warm or cold, depends on the weather outside, at school. We were able to, for the most part, not be abused at school. So school became a refuge in so many ways. It also, through books and reading and teachers, and librarians, I started to see through their eyes and these books a different world that was possible and probable. And the other part I would say is my brother and sister. So while my mom may have planted a seed, my brother and sister and I were able to reinforce it with each other, to hold each other accountable. All three of us now have advanced degrees. That's not typical in a normal, if you will, family, never mind foster kids. So I think it was definitely my mom, the safety and security we had through school, and then ultimately each other and some foster parents. But I kind of often get asked, like, well, if you made it, how do other people get made it? And I just want to be clear, the unique and odd circumstances of my life will not be a system that we can design to capture the millions of children living in poverty. We can't design a system around an exception. I'm a cisgendered white guy. We can't design a system around that. We have to figure out, how do we design a system that's robust enough to handle all of these children, because they all have potential. And my reality and the unique circumstances of my character, we shouldn't create a whole system around that. It's not going to be powerful enough to shape and help all these children's lives. So definitely my family, definitely I enjoyed it, definitely received core needs in these places. And all that led me in some measure to be here with you today, having written this book with that a very expensive degree behind me from Vassar and from UCLA.
All right. Well, I mean, it is an unbelievable story. And I'm so glad to be here with you today. I'm so glad you are where you are. So we talked to parents of teenagers, and I wanted to focus it in a little bit around your adolescence. So first, where were you? I assume foster care during adolescence, or?
Yeah. So at 12 years old, I went into foster care and stayed there until I was roughly 17 when I emancipated from foster care. And it's interesting that it's called emancipation. I think a lot of that word has so much depth and meaning in our society, and it's important that we acknowledge that. But it's also quite remarkable that at 17, I became a legally independent adult. Who's independent at 17? So between
Not in
my
my house.
early, right? Or even 30. Hey, mom, can you help me with this car loan? Or hey, mom, dad, I need help with a down payment. So I was in foster care for most of that period of time and really struggled. I think foster kids in particular, but all adolescents are going through puberty, are trying to figure out and shape who they are trying to fit in and at the same time, stand out. It's all very much a place of tumult, as it should be, and a ferment where you learn to form friendships and really start to set the boundaries of who you are and who you want to become. And for myself, it was just, a constant hurricane with moments of quiet. So it was challenging to form that identity and in a place of security. In fact, some of that trauma I still carry with me today, in terms of forming authentic friendships that are show me being vulnerable. And it's certainly a skill you learn in your adolescence. For me, I, barely went to school, moved around way too much, and was really challenged to downshift out of survival mode into what people kept telling me, be a kid. And I think if you're a teenager listening to this, nothing is more annoying than being told to be a child when you feel like you are more responsible and able. So that was always a challenge for me.
Okay, so what did you said on Instagram? I remember when I prayed for things that I now currently have, and so I just wanted to ask you, what did you pray for when you were a teenager?
Yeah. So right now I'm sitting in my home that I own, and it's sometimes I actually will walk down the stairs and I literally place my hand against a wall and be like, oh my gosh,
Hmm.
this, this is my home. This is my home and no one can take it away from me except the bank. Um, and that is such a profound thing. I think a lot of us grow up in a certain environment and we don't appreciate it because it's just the background noise to our life. But growing up with no consistent place to live or stay, it is really profound to own your home. That's something that I knew I wanted and expected to have, but was something I prayed for. My mom, my mom's still with us. She's mentally ill still, but I'm my mom's guardian. I help care for her. She has a state appointed guardian, and I assist that individual. My mom is okay. My mom's okay. My mom is definitely still, who she was, but she's also much older and she's receiving help. And so that's something that I always wanted was my mom to be okay. And my brother and sister, I wanted us to survive this insane process that tried to grind us into nothing. And they're both great. They're both in great relationships with beautiful families, with successful careers. Um, and that is something I always hoped for and prayed for. And I'll tell you this final image I've always had about my mom, which hasn't come true per se, but it's something I do pray for and think about. I think about my mom as someone who's been in a prison for 80 plus years of fear and delusion, mental health and sadness and depression and all these things I think teenagers probably know a little bit about. My mom's been in that jail for decades. And so I have always pictured, whatever you believe, the spiritual hand coming into my mom's head and just calming all of that voice, all of those delusions. And I just wanted to sit across my mom and have a conversation and meet the woman who I know is in there. I sometimes saw, who loved us the best she could. And I want to ask her about herself and who she was, who she wished she could have been. And I also want to tell her I forgive her and I love her very much. And I want her to understand that at a deep level that I don't think she can in her current state. I'm not going to say fortunate because things weren't handed to me, but I'm so happy with where I'm at. And so much so that I did post that on Instagram because it's true. It's true.
I just can't believe you can say how much you love your mother after the childhood that you were handed. I mean, that's a lesson for all of us. Like, I don't know
Well,
how.
I think we all have to forgive our parents, don't we? Some of us right now. But my mom, if she had cancer, we would not condemn her for losing her hair during chemo or becoming sick. My mom has an illness, and unfortunately, part of the symptoms are the way she treated us. And mental health and mental illness is really hard. I mean, that statement I just made took decades um, to articulate, but it's always how I felt, which is how I've always been able to love my mom regardless, which is my mom's sick and you cannot hate or be angry with a sick person. You can very much not want the violence and abuse, right? Who would?
Right.
But it doesn't mean you get angry at a sick person or you burn a flame of anger that only harms you because they're just too ill to understand it. Never mind agree with it. So I think if I didn't have that orientation in my life, I would be a much different person, much less loving, much less a champion of change. As President Obama said, I'd be much more angry. And that's just not who I am. My mom, in the first part of the book, I dedicated to her. And I say to my mom, who taught me to forgive early and to do one impossible thing at a time. And I mean that.
It's beautiful. All right. So along the way, you have these two siblings and you're kind of a team,
Yeah.
but you're not getting a whole lot of external reinforcement for like what your future could look like. So who comes in and touches you in a way that lets you see that there's still possibility for you?
Yeah. It's a very good question. And I think a lot of folks, as we go through our day, it's just a typical day, we do encounter people that make it a better day. And we focus on the negative, the person that cut us off in traffic, but we don't focus on that barista who smiled and gave us just a little bit more whipped cream. So I think what I have found in my life at various points are what I call occasional angels. folks who, when my family or myself was drowning below the surface, reached in and pulled us out. And they didn't pull us all the way out, but I got enough of a gulp of air to sustain myself. And that could have been the church minister that allowed us to sleep in a linen closet during the coldest parts of winter one year. It was a family that sent us to summer camp. The first time I ever was, I mean, it was just so bizarre. This whole experience called summer camp. It was an anathema to me. I was like, what's summer camp? You know, summer's hot, you know, like that's about all I knew. It's when the rats run around the city. But it was just such an anathema. And then to go there and see folks and how it could be and this beautiful joy, I was like, oh, that's great. And this was this random church family, to Holly, who is the foster mom that I'm very much in touch with, her husband Steve and their daughters, my sisters, who took a, relatively speaking, broken individual that had gone through hell in foster care and group homes and detention and come to her. And she was not a foster mom. She decided to fight for me because she saw what was going on. Not all of us can foster or adopt or send somebody to summer camp. But what I say is all of us can do something. All of us can care. My website, davidambrose.com, has a link to my activism. And one of the things I've created is what I call a buffet of engagement. You may be a teenager. You may be an individual with not a lot of money. But I'm running a campaign right now called Donate Your Small Talk. Donate Your Small Talk is this idea that instead of talking about the weather or what you did that weekend or a sports team, we talk about something that matters, like foster kids. Like, did you know Steve Jobs was adopted out of foster care? Did you know Marilyn Monroe was a foster kid? Just talk, look there, find something fun that's interesting to you and talk about it. Or if you want to go dark, go dark. More kids coming out of foster care will go to jail than to college. More kids will go to jail coming out of foster care than college. Donate Your Small Talk is an effort to acknowledge that all of us can do something. And of course, then you could do more. You know, you could become a volunteer. You could, become a CASA, which is a special volunteer, or you could become a foster parent, or you could give $1 for a scholarship fund. All of us can do something. And those adults and those moments throughout my life taught me that. I'll tell you one final story. When I was a child in poverty, we would beg all over the city, in different cities. And I always was struck by how often, almost 99% of the time, it felt like people wouldn't even look at me. And wouldn't even look at me. They just would walk by me. And today, I never walk by, especially a child. It doesn't mean I always give. I know the right answer is to donate to charities, to lift people out of poverty, and to support policy. But I cannot walk by a child. I give them my attention. I acknowledge their humanity. All of us can do something. And when I was at a key moment in my life, $1 would make a difference in my day. I don't know these countless individuals that gave me $1, but that made the difference to me between eating and not eating, being hit or not being hit, sleeping somewhere or not sleeping somewhere. And those hundreds of individuals over those years are a part of why I'm sitting here talking to you with this book. So I hope people are motivated not just to have empathy and pity, but to realize that they have agency and power to change lives for kids.
That's amazing. Okay, there's so much to ask. Where should I go? Okay, so you have this story you tell about story hour at the library.
Mm-hmm.
It's so painful. It's also not hard to imagine. So can you give us a short version of that story? And then I want to talk about your reaction to that and how you get out from under that.
Absolutely. So we really didn't go to much school. I don't really remember school except for a rare occasion, and my brother, sister, and I when we were young. And so one of the places that we stayed a lot of time in were the public libraries in New York City and other cities like Boston and Albany. And those public libraries became more than just four walls. They became an entire world. If you've read the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, you walk through the door of the armoire and you're in a different world. And we slept there. We made them our home. But one thing that I treasured was story time. I loved, and I still love today, I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I love being read to. And I love the librarians that would do it, and they'd have snacks. So we sat down one day. I don't know my exact age. I was probably under the age of 8. and they started reading. She was about to start reading. And I sat down, it was a little semicircle, and a mother came and she stood in front of me, just towering over me, looking down at me, and yelled at me and, said, "You're disgusting. Get away from my son." And her son was sitting right on my left. And to her credit, I was. I was homeless. I had not showered at a real shower in I don't know how long. I probably had lice. Um, and I was filthy. I was just filthy. And the librarian came over and she smoothed things out, and the boy moved and she started the story. And I tell that story in the book, but what I don't tell is what happened after. So when she finished, I barely heard the story because I was so burning with just shame. And when the story was over, I wanted to prove I wasn't going to move. And then I did move. I went to the bathroom. And I took one of those horrible paper towels that we're all familiar with, and a wad of them, and I started to clean myself. And just a couple wipes, and I saw how filthy I'd become and how much I didn't even smell myself anymore. And I just wept. I was so tired of being so dirty and so embarrassed, but also just angry. Like, what do you want me to do? And I wasn't even yet 10. So I think, part of, again, why I'm sharing the story is it's just still too common. There's still millions of Americans' children experiencing abject poverty and homelessness, like myself when I was a kid. And that is, I just can't see another generation living through that. And all of us can do something. And that's what I go back to is I feel that boy's shame, and I am in my 40s. So how can I help prevent that for another kid that's out there today?
Okay, so that was my next question. So, the shame was so palpable, and is it something you can overcome? I mean, are you trapped
Mm,
in that shame for the rest of your life, or do you have moments of it and then moments where you're away from it?
sure. I am not trapped in anything. I believe superpower and emotion are the same thing. My feelings of deep experience are what empower me to be a fierce advocate. That I can still connect to that young man, and what he felt is what keeps me going, despite the circumstances of how hard it is to change things sometimes. So I feel so well adapted to where I'm at today. It wasn't always the case. It's been a lot of therapy. For many years, I described the system of what I used to do. I used to take all the traumas that were thrown at me, and I'd put them in a box and put it on a shelf. And it was a clear box because I knew where it was. I saw what was in it, but I didn't have to feel it fully. And I would label it, and I put it in my card catalog, and I would know exactly where to find it. When I was in my 30s, the shelf broke, and all this stuff started coming off the shelf. And the way that I had dealt with the world, and not feeling all the assaults, I wasn't able to use any longer. I had to deal with things and all that other stuff. So I got great therapy, and I've been in therapy, and it's been so helpful. It's helped me understand that that's not the best way to inhabit the world, and it's okay to feel deeply, and be sad and be happy and have all the emotions. We move too quickly through all of our emotions, in my opinion, or in my therapist's opinion, which is now my opinion. And I feel very much empowered by all those experiences that I had. I don't want kids to have all the experiences I had, but I am not trapped by them. In fact, my fire is brighter for them. And I hope it leads to change. But I feel just so happy and blessed to be where I'm at today.
So shame was one emotion that you felt in that
Mhm.
environment, and now here you are today, um, writing a memoir, bringing us
Mhm.
into this very tragic story that most of us don't understand, and that's another experience of tremendous vulnerability.
Mm.
So, was there a point in time where have you always walked around the world telling your story, or was there a transition and you kind of?
I've had to come out again and again for many things, not just being a gay man, but I people knew a little bit, and in fact, some of the stories in there my brother and sister didn't know, and brought us as a family to tears. um, I think all of us have incredible stories that we don't share, and it doesn't mean that we climb Mount Everest, but it is a profound something that we keep. And I just had a collection of those. Most folks that are my friends don't know these things. Most of my family doesn't know some of these things, most of these things, and certainly not in a story form. So I kept them because, as you said about vulnerability, vulnerability is like yoga. It's a practice. You have to practice vulnerability. You have to think about it. So I have had to learn to be vulnerable in that way and share these stories. I'll tell you one example. I served on the Planning Commission, which is a body, government body that looks at real estate development, big buildings, projects, office towers. And this project came before us that was about a homelessness shelter. And the conversation was awful. The way that people that were opposing this essentially a shelter for women and children. And I was sitting up there. I was the president of this little committee, this commission, and the language was so dehumanizing. And they were basically talking about my family. And inside I was roiling, and outside I was just implacable because that's what you're supposed to be, right? And I finally stopped, and I just came out as a homeless person, which is really the first time many people in my life knew that. They knew I sort of was in foster care, and it changed the dynamic and the dialogue in the room. It brought my colleagues on the committee along with me to not only support it, but enthusiastically support it and condemn the dialogue. So I think all of us can be more vulnerable. I understand and recognize that it's not always possible because there are certain conditions in your life, but it's something I've had to do again and again. And this book is a massive effort to use all of these things that I experienced, the good, the bad, and the ugly, to empower my future, to change the future for others. And I'm proud to come out for all the reasons that are in this book.
Okay, my last question is, I don't know if this is your quote or if it's commonly known, but you can get knocked over by the wave, or you can get on the surfboard and ride it.
It's my quote.
It's your quote? Okay,
Yeah.
I'll be attributing it to you from now on. It's a great one. But you know how there are memories where you know where you were standing when
Sure.
X happened. So where were you in life when this became your, guiding light?
There were moments, and it doesn't mean I was always on the surfboard. Sometimes it fell off. I think the first time, and this is the first time I remember it very well, is actually the first chapter when my family was homeless in New York City, and we were walking all night because that's sometimes what my mom would have us do. And the temperature kept dropping and dropping and dropping. It was sometime around Christmas, and it was freezing. And we were slowly dying of exposure out in the city, just freezing, the three of us. We were probably 5, 6, and 7, or 6, 7, and 8, or some combination like that. And we ended up at a men's shelter, and barely did they let us in. So we got in, and my mom sat us down, and we were looking at her. And like I told you, my mom sometimes the mom that I knew she would have been breaks through. And she stood above us, and she's like, "Is this what you want?" And we were sharing one cot. We were filthy. I'd pissed myself. That's how cold I was. And filthy, covered in lice, just a filthy family looking out at the shelter full. It was one open room full of men on cots. It was an emergency shelter, I believe. And I just remember looking out, and I screamed out, "No, no." And I had no idea up until that point that I had had a choice. And I didn't know what that choice was or how I would get it. But I knew that in that moment, I did not want this. I did not want this feeling. I did not want this for my mom, for my family. I did not want to be one of these nameless masses of people that were abandoned all around us by society and their families. I did not want this. And I knew, and that's the first time I got my limb onto the top of that surfboard and said, I'm going to get the hell out of here. And not everyone can do that. And not everyone should be expected to do that. The bootstrap theory is bullshit. I'm just going to curse, sorry, is not real.
We say it.
What if you don't have boots? And I'm so tired of people saying, oh, well, you made it, other people can't. That's not right. We shouldn't have a lottery system for children in this country. We should not have a lottery system for children in this country to survive childhood. That is messed up. So for folks listening, reach out, help other kids in your community, figure out what you can do, and orient your life towards service in this way, whatever way. You know, it's a buffet. You don't have to eat all the broccoli, but you can certainly pick something up there that you can do. And when people always say, well, I can't. That's the first thing people say to me. I'm like, don't start with what you can't. So what can you do? Can you log into a school board meeting? Can you go to one meeting a year and ask them what they're doing to help foster kids? Can you volunteer to shelter one time every 5 years? What can you do?
That's a big burden once every 5 years.
If we orient ourselves to asking ourselves, how are we empowered?
Yeah.
We begin to chip away at the millions of kids and families that need us to look at them straight in the eye, own their condition as a country. We're better than this. We sent a person to the moon. We can figure out how to have no homeless children in this country, right? And I just can't believe that we're still in the same place as when I was a kid. We've made progress in some respects, but the numbers, we should be ashamed, and we should work on it and turn that pity and empathy into action, and all of us can take action.
I think one of the easiest things you brought up earlier is look people in the eye, just see them as humans, like if you can't do anything else. Okay. First of all, we have copies of the book. So hold up your cover again, A Place Called Home. And if I assume all of us want more of you. So get that book and email us to be entered into the raffle. And I want to say how honored I am that you took the morning to talk to us. And I'm so grateful that I get to be here and meeting you and hearing your story. So David Ambrose, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone for listening and for looking at the book. And I just hope I've inspired you to figure out and ask yourself today that question, what can I do? And do it.
Thank you.